The rain in the Hürtgen Forest was a special kind of miserable. It wasn't the honest, hard-driving rain of a summer storm back home that washed the world clean. This was a cold, persistent German drizzle that fell through the skeletal remains of the trees in a perpetual twilight. It soaked through your wool overcoat, wormed its way into your bones, and turned the forest floor into a primordial soup of mud, leaf litter, and God only knew what else. We'd been breathing this forest, eating it, sleeping in it, and dying in it for weeks that felt like years. The air itself was heavy with the smell of wet pine, rot, and the lingering metallic tang of cordite. Every snap of a twig could be a German patrol. Every shadow could be an MG-42 nest. They called it the Green Hell. But by November of 1944, most of the green had been blasted away, leaving only a skeletal gray labyrinth of splintered wood and churned earth. My squad, what was left of it, was holed up in a series of shallow, waterlogged foxholes that we'd inherited from the company that had been chewed to pieces here before us. We were part of the 28th Infantry Division, the Keystone, and we were being bled white for a few miserable yards of forest that General Bradley's grand plan probably made look important on a map. Down here in the mud, it was just a graveyard for boys who should have been back in Pennsylvania, working in the mines or on the farms. We'd lost Corporal Evans 2 days ago to a sniper we never saw. One moment he was telling a dirty joke, the next he was just a heap of wet wool with a neat black hole in his helmet. The hole in our line was more than just physical. Evans had been with us since the hedgerows of Normandy. He was a piece of the squad's soul, and now he was gone. That was why Lieutenant Davies, a fresh-faced kid from West Point, who still believed in things like taking the initiative, told me we were getting a replacement. My stomach soured at the news. A replacement. FNG, fucking new guy. It meant another lamb to the slaughter, another boy whose face I'd have to learn just in time to forget it. It meant another liability, another pair of clumsy feet to make noise, another greenhorn who would freeze at the wrong moment and get good men killed. His name is Webster, Sergeant, the lieutenant had said, pointing at a figure trudging up the muddy track toward us. Private Daniel Webster. Just came over from a replacement depot in England. See that he gets integrated. Integrated, sir? I grunted, my voice raspy from too many cigarettes and too much shouting. You mean I should show him where to dig his hole before a shell integrates him with the landscape? The lieutenant's jaw tightened. He didn't like my brand of humor. Just get him squared away, Sergeant Riley. He turned and walked off, probably to go read a field manual about how to win a war without getting your boots dirty. I turned my attention to the approaching problem. Private Daniel Webster was a walking cliché. He was tall and gawky, with the kind of soft, unlined face that hadn't yet learned how to grow a proper beard. His uniform was a clean, crisp olive drab, a stark insult to our own filthy, mud-caked fatigues. It was so new, I could still see the factory creases in his trousers. He carried a brand new M1 Garand like it was a precious, alien artifact, holding it away from his body to keep it from getting dirty. His helmet was unscratched. His eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and a pathetic, doe-eyed eagerness to please. He looked like he'd just stepped off a recruiting poster and into a nightmare. He was a ghost. He just didn't know it yet. He stopped in front of me and my two remaining veterans, Tony Chi Gallo, a wiry street fighter from Chicago, and Corporal Miller, a quiet, steady farmer from Ohio. Chi sized up the new kid with a predatory grin, while Miller just looked tired, the 1,000-yard stare already claiming him. Private Daniel Webster, reporting for duty, Sergeant, the kid chirped, his voice cracking on the last word. He tried to salute, fumbling with his rifle and nearly dropping it. I didn't return the salute. I just stared at him, letting the silence hang in the damp air. I took a long drag from my cigarette and blew the smoke out slowly. There are only two kinds of people in this forest, Webster, I said, my voice low and flat. The quick and the dead. Right now you don't look very quick. What's in the pack? Your mother's cookies? His face flushed a deep red. No, Sergeant. Standard issue gear, Sergeant. Let's see the rifle, I commanded, holding out my hand. He shifted the Garand and tried to pass it to me. His hands, slick with nervous sweat, lost their grip. The rifle, all 8.5 pounds of American-made steel and wood, clattered onto a rock at my feet. The sound was like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet of the woods. Chi winced. Miller closed his eyes. I felt a hot spike of fury rise in my chest. He couldn't even hold on to the one thing meant to keep him alive. Pick it up, I snarled. He scrambled to obey, his movements clumsy and panicked. He wiped the mud from the stock with his clean sleeve, smearing it. You dropped that rifle again, I said, leaning in so my face was inches from his. And you'll be digging latrines with it until you can field strip it blindfolded. Then I'll have you eat your meals off the stock for a week. Do you understand me, Private? Yes, Sergeant. Crystal clear, Sergeant, he stammered, his eyes wide as dinner plates. Good. Now find a spot over there and start digging. I want a hole deep enough to hide your whole useless body, and I want it done 10 minutes ago. I pointed to a patch of ground a few yards away. And keep your head down. There's a kraut sniper out there who loves fresh targets. He scurried off like a frightened rabbit. Chi let out a low whistle. Sarge, you're going to give the kid a heart attack before the krauts even get a chance. Better me than them, I grumbled, turning away. At least I won't kill him for it. Keep an eye on him. Make sure he doesn't shoot himself in the foot, trying to figure out how his shovel works. The next few hours were a masterclass in incompetence. Webster fumbled with his entrenching tool, the small, foldable shovel we all lived and died by. He'd dig for a minute, then stop to wipe the sweat from his brow, his head popping up over the terrain like a whack-a-mole. Each time I'd hiss at him to get down, my nerves fraying a little more. He was from West Virginia, he'd said on his papers. A coal miner's son. You'd think he'd know how to handle a shovel, how to move earth. But fear makes a man forget everything he's ever known. He wasn't a miner here. He was just a scared kid, and he was digging his foxhole like he was planting petunias in his mother's garden. It was shallow, wide, with no proper grenade sump. A perfect death trap. Later, as we prepared to move out for a short patrol to probe the German lines, he proved to be just as useless on the march. His gear wasn't properly secured. His canteen sloshed with every step, the metal cup rattling against it. His helmet wasn't fitted right, and it shifted on his head, the strap squeaking. In the dead quiet of the Hürtgen, he sounded like a one-man band. I moved back down the line and got right behind him. Webster, I whispered, the sound of venomous puff of air. If you make one more sound, I will personally use your intestines to tie your gear down. Take that cup off your canteen and stick it in your pack. Tighten your helmet strap. Walk on the balls of your feet. Do you want every machine gun in this forest to know we're coming? He nodded mutely, his hands trembling as he tried to adjust his gear. He was trying, I'll give him that. But trying doesn't stop bullets. He was a walking, talking, noise-making invitation to an ambush. We didn't have to wait long. We were moving through a particularly dense section of woods, the ground thick with slick, rotting leaves, over ankle-twisting roots when it happened. Not an ambush, not a full-blown attack. Just the war reminding us it was always there. It started with a sound, a low, guttural cough from far off. It was a sound we all knew, a sound that haunted our sleep. A German Nebelwerfer. The multi-barreled rocket launcher the GIs had nicknamed the Screaming Mimi. Incoming, Miller yelled, his voice tight. Experience took over. Without a thought, the three of us, me, Chi, and Miller, dove for cover, pressing ourselves into the mud behind the meager shelter of a fallen, moss-covered log. We curled into tight balls, hands over our helmets, mouths open to equalize the pressure. The air began to shriek, a horrifying rising crescendo like torn canvas. It was the sound of death coming for you by airmail. The rockets landed about 50 yards to our left, with a series of deafening crump-crump-crump sounds that shook the very ground. Dirt, splintered wood, and hot shrapnel rained down through the canopy. The shockwaves punched the air from my lungs. For a few seconds, the world was nothing but noise and vibration. Then silence, broken only by the tinkle of debris falling through the branches and a ringing in my ears. I cautiously lifted my head. Chi and Miller were doing the same, giving me a thumbs up. I looked for Webster. He was standing bolt upright, right where we'd left him, in the middle of the trail. He was frozen solid, his M1 held loosely at his side, his face a chalk-white mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He hadn't moved an inch. He had just stood there, a perfect statue for the shrapnel to find. It was a miracle he was still in one piece. The fury that had been simmering inside me all day boiled over. This was it. This was how good men died. They died because a scared kid forgot how to move his own goddamn feet. I scrambled up, ran the few yards to him, and tackled him, driving him hard into the mud. I grabbed the front of his jacket, hauling his face close to mine. His eyes were unfocused, staring at nothing. He was gone. Webster. Snap out of it, I roared, shaking him violently. You want to die? Is that it? You want to stand there and let them kill you? Because if you do it, you're taking us with you." His eyes slowly came back into focus. He blinked, looking at me with a dawning horror, realizing what he'd done. Or rather, what he hadn't done. I couldn't move, Sarge, he whispered, his body trembling uncontrollably. I heard the sound and I just froze. "You freeze again and I'll leave you where you stand," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly cold whisper. I let him go, shoving him away from me. He fell back into the mud, a pathetic, shivering heap. I didn't offer a hand. I just stood over him. "Get up. The patrol's over. We're going back. You're a liability." The walk back was silent and heavy with shame. Webster trudged behind us, his head bowed. The other two wouldn't even look at him. He had failed the most basic test of survival. When the shells come in, you go to ground. You don't think. You just do it. It's an animal instinct. And he didn't have it. That evening, the real test came. As dusk bled through the trees, turning the gray forest to black, a German patrol stumbled toward our position. It was a small unit, maybe 4 or 5 men, moving carelessly. Maybe they were as tired as we were. Maybe they were green, too. We were in position, hidden, waiting. My order was clear. Hold your fire until they're in the kill zone. Let them get close. One clean, coordinated volley. Surprise is everything. I was on the left, Miller in the center, Chi on the right. I put Webster a little behind us, where he could hopefully do the least amount of damage. I watched the gray-clad figures move through the trees, their Kar 98K rifles held at the ready. They were close now. 30 yards, 25. I could see the eagle on the front of one of their helmets. My finger tightened on the trigger of my Thompson. I was about to give the signal. Suddenly, to my right, there was a deafening bang. Then another, and another. A frantic succession of 8 shots, as fast as a man could pull a trigger. Webster. He had opened fire. From 40 yards out, he'd panicked and emptied his entire M1 Garand at a shadow. The distinctive ping of his en-bloc clip ejecting echoed through the forest. A loud, clear announcement that one American rifle was now empty and reloading. The Germans, instantly alerted, dove for cover and returned fire. The air exploded with the sharp crack of their rifles and the terrifying cloth-ripping sound of an MG-42 opening up from somewhere behind them. Muzzle flashes stabbed through the gloom. Bullets zipped over our heads, thudding into the trees around us. Our element of surprise was gone, replaced by a chaotic firefight we weren't prepared for. "God damn it!" I screamed into the noise. "Gallo, suppress that machine gun! Miller, with me! We're pulling back now!" We laid down a spray of covering fire, forcing the Germans to keep their heads down, long enough for us to scramble back, retreating from cover to cover. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. We broke contact and fell back to our main line, hearts pounding, adrenaline coursing through our veins. No one was hit. We were lucky. But luck is a finite resource in a war, and Webster had just spent a month's worth of it on one stupid mistake. When we were back in the relative safety of our foxholes, I stormed over to where he was huddled, fumbling to reload a clip into his rifle with shaking hands. I kicked his helmet. The metal rang, and he looked up at me, his face pale in the gloom. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. "What part of 'hold your fire' did you not understand? You just turned a perfect ambush into a goddamn shooting gallery. You gave away our position, you wasted your ammunition, and you announced to every crowd in this sector that you were empty. You could have gotten every single one of us killed." "I saw one of them raise his rifle, Sarge," he pleaded, his voice a pathetic whine. "I thought he saw us." "I thought—" "You thought?" I spat the word at him like poison. "Hey, you're not paid to think. You're not paid to have ideas. You're paid to follow my orders, to do exactly as you are told, when you are told. Your thinking gets men killed. Your instincts get men killed. You are a walking, talking death sentence for this squad, Webster." I stood there, breathing heavily, looking down at him. He was no soldier. He was a child playing dress-up, and the game had become too real. I had seen dozens like him. They came full of piss and vinegar or full of fear, it didn't matter. They all ended up the same way, as a name on a list, a memory that would fade. But before they went, they had a nasty habit of taking good men with them. I turned my back on him. I couldn't even look at him anymore. I walked over to my foxhole and slumped down, the cold mud seeping into my pants. I pulled out a crumpled letter from my own pocket. I didn't read it. I just held it, feeling the worn paper. Every man here had a reason to want to go home, a life they'd left behind. My job was to get as many of them there as I could. But looking at Webster, I knew he wasn't going home. And my greatest fear was that he was going to make damn sure none of us did either. He was more dangerous than a German sniper. He was more terrifying than an artillery barrage. He was a burden. And in the Hürtgen Forest, you cut your burdens loose, or they drag you down into the mud with them. One way or another, I decided, I had to get rid of Private Daniel Webster. The aftermath of the failed patrol settled over us like a wet shroud. We didn't talk about it. In the Hürtgen, you didn't dwell on screw-ups unless they came with a body count. And by some miracle, Webster's panic hadn't cost us anything more than ammunition and a fresh layer of grime on our souls. But the silence was worse than shouting. Webster was a pariah, isolated by a wall of unspoken contempt. He sat huddled by himself, trying to clean his rifle with hands that still trembled, avoiding everyone's gaze. Gallo, who would normally be cracking wise to keep the mood from flatlining, was quiet and grim. Miller just stared into the dripping trees, his face a stoic mask that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion. The kid had shaken them. He'd shown them how fast things could go wrong, how thin the line was between a coordinated attack and a panicked rout. He was a walking reminder of their own mortality, and nobody wanted to look at him. I let them stew in it. I let Webster feel the full weight of his failure. War wasn't a place for coddling. It was a brutal teacher, and the first lesson was that your actions had consequences for everyone. If he couldn't learn that, he was already dead. The problem was, I was responsible for the men he might take with him. The thought gnawed at me, a cold, hard knot in my gut. Evans was dead. We were down to a fire team, not a squad. I couldn't afford another weak link. I couldn't afford a man who froze when the shooting started. I had to get my remaining men through this meat grinder, and Private Webster was a millstone around my neck, threatening to drag us all under. The rain kept falling. It was the soundtrack to our war, a constant miserable percussion that promised more mud, more cold, more misery. Late in the afternoon, a runner slithered up the trail and told me Lieutenant Davies wanted to see me at the makeshift company CP, a slightly larger, slightly deeper hole in the ground about 50 yards back. I pulled myself out of my foxhole, my joints protesting, and trudged back to see what fresh hell the brass had cooked up for us. The lieutenant was kneeling in his command post, a poncho strung overhead, doing a poor job of keeping the rain off a large map case. The map was pristine, a clean grid of contour lines and symbols, a perfect, logical world that bore no resemblance to the splintered, chaotic hellscape we were actually in. He was pointing at a spot on the map with a manicured finger. "Here, Sergeant," he said, his voice filled with that crisp West Point confidence that always set my teeth on edge. "This is our objective for 0600 tomorrow. It's a concrete pillbox, part of the main Siegfried Line defenses. Intelligence says it's got at least one MG-42, maybe two. It's pinning down the entire company's advance on this sector." I leaned over, squinting at the map. I knew the spot. We all did. We called it the Bitch. It was set into the base of a low ridge, perfectly positioned with interlocking fields of fire. Taking it with a full-strength company would be suicide. Taking it with what was left of us was a bad joke. "Sir, with all due respect," I began, keeping my voice level. "Charlie Company tried a direct assault on that position last week. They lost 17 men in 10 minutes and never got within 50 yards. That's because they went straight up the gut," Davies countered, his eyes bright with tactical fervor. "We're not going to make that mistake. We're going to be smarter. My plan is a flanking maneuver. Your squad will move under the cover of darkness along this creek bed here." He traced a blue line on the map and come up on its blind side. "A pre-dawn assault. We'll have mortars on standby to lay down smoke and suppressive fire on the surrounding trenches. Surprise and violence of action, Sergeant." Surprise and violence of action. He sounded like he was quoting a textbook. I just grunted, my eyes scanning the terrain features on the map. The plan wasn't terrible on paper. The problem was, the paper wasn't trying to kill you. The creek bed would be a muddy sewer. The blind side was probably mined. And the Germans in that pillbox weren't stupid. They'd be expecting a flanking attack. They were probably just sitting there, waiting, their Hitler's buzzsaw already sighted in on the exact route the lieutenant was so proud of. Old von Rundstedt, the Kraut general running this whole show, hadn't held the line this long by being predictable. Then, my eyes fell on another feature, a smaller ridge, about 200 yards to the east of the pillbox. It was higher, offering a clear line of sight to the objective and the German rear positions. But it was also horribly exposed. A lone, ugly spine of rock and skeletal trees. "What about that ridge, Lieutenant?" I asked, tapping the spot. "Overwatch?" Davies nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We need eyes up there. An observation post. It would be critical to spot any counterattack forming up, or to direct mortar fire, but it's risky. It's a one, maybe two-man job. Too much movement and the Krauts will plaster it with everything they've got." And that's when the idea formed in my mind. It was a cold, ugly, brutally practical thought. It arrived fully formed, a perfect, terrible solution to my problem. An observation post. A risky one-man job. A way to remove the variable that was Private Webster. I looked from the map to the lieutenant's eager face, then back at the map. My mind was a grim calculator, tallying the odds. If I took Webster on the main assault, he would panic. He would make noise. He would fire at the wrong time. He would get men killed, my men. Men like Miller and Chi, who trusted me to make the right calls. But if I sent him to that ridge, he'd be out of the way. He'd be alone. If he panicked up there, he would only get himself killed. The Germans would drop a few mortar rounds on his position, and my problem would be solved. It was a clean, simple, and utterly ruthless piece of battlefield arithmetic. One life sacrificed to protect the others. It was the kind of math that sergeants have to do. The kind that doesn't appear in the field manuals. I could almost frame it as a mercy. Up on that ridge, he'd die quick. In the assault on the pillbox, he'd die screaming and terrified, and he'd take others with him. This was the cleaner way. The professional way. "I have the man for the job, sir," I said, my voice betraying nothing of the cold calculation happening behind my eyes. "I'll send our replacement, Private Webster. It'll be a good chance for him to get his feet wet without being in the thick of the assault." The lieutenant beamed. "Excellent, Sergeant. See? That's the kind of initiative I like to see. Get him briefed. The rest of your squad gets some rest. You move out at 0400. I walked back to our position, the decision settled in my gut like a block of ice. The rain had eased slightly, but the air was still thick and cold. I found Webster sitting where I'd left him, a picture of misery. "Webster, on your feet," I commanded. He scrambled up, his eyes wide and fearful. He expected another tongue lashing. He didn't expect an order. I led him a few yards away from the others, out of earshot. I didn't bother with a map. I just pointed into the gloomy darkness. "You see that ridgeline over there, the high one?" He squinted, then nodded numbly. "At 0400, you're going up there. You're taking a field phone and a spool of commo wire. You will find a position that gives you a view of the German lines to the west. You will unspool that wire all the way back here. You will sit there, you will keep your head down, and you will report what you see. You report on enemy movement. You report on troop concentrations. You report on anything that looks like a counterattack. You are our eyes. Is that understood?" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was looking at the ridge, a dark, menacing shape against the bruised purple sky. He had to know what it was. A solo mission. An exposed position. It was a death sentence. His face went pale, but to my surprise, he didn't argue. He just squared his gawky shoulders. "Yes, Sergeant." "Good." I turned to leave, then stopped. "You'll be issued extra rations and 2 extra bandoliers of ammunition. You will not fire unless you are directly engaged. Your job is to see, not to fight. Don't draw attention to yourself." I walked away without another word. I saw Chi and Miller watching me. They'd heard enough. Chi looked down, busying himself with a loose thread on his glove. Miller met my eyes for a second, his own gaze unreadable. Then he too looked away. They knew. They understood what I had just done. This wasn't a tactical decision. It was an execution. And they were complicit in their silence. It was a dirty piece of business, and the shame of it hung between us in the damp air. At 03:45, the squad was awake. The air was frigid, and our breath plumed in front of us. I watched as Webster gathered his gear. He picked up the heavy EE-8 field phone in its leather case and slung it over his shoulder. Then came the spool of commo wire, a heavy, awkward metal donut that weighed a good 30 pounds. He struggled to get it situated on his back. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely buckle the straps. He looked impossibly young and terribly alone. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something that might have been guilt. He was just a kid from the hills of West Virginia, scared out of his mind, and I was sending him to die on a lonely hill because he was an inconvenience. I crushed the feeling. Sentiment was a luxury. It was a cancer that ate at you, that made you hesitate. And hesitation was fatal. Webster approached me, his gear finally on. He looked like a beast of burden, weighed down and clumsy. "Ready, Sergeant," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I looked him up and down, my face an impassive mask. "Remember your orders, Private. Stay low, stay quiet." I paused, then added the final, cynical twist of the knife. "And don't call us unless you see a Panzer division rolling up. We'll be busy." He nodded, turned, and began to trudge away from us, a lonely figure melting into the pre-dawn fog. The heavy spool of wire on his back unreeled slowly behind him, a thin black umbilical cord connecting him to a world he was about to leave. I watched until the fog swallowed him completely. I didn't expect to ever see him again. The wire would go dead within the hour, cut by shrapnel or a German patrol. The kid would be just another name, listed as missing in action. I turned back to the two men who were left, the two men I was actually trying to save. Their faces were grim in the faint light. "All right," I said, my voice hard and all business. The dirty work was done. Now it was our turn. "Let's go over it one more time. Chi, you're on point with the Thompson. Miller, you're carrying the extra satchel charges. We move slow and we move quiet. I don't want to hear a pin drop. We get to the edge of that creek bed and we wait for the mortar barrage. The second the smoke hits, we move. No hesitation. We get inside that pillbox and we clean it out. Let's go." We moved out in the opposite direction, down into the slick, muddy ravine that was supposed to be our covered approach. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the tension was a physical thing, a tight band around my chest. Every nerve was alive, every sense screaming. This was what it was all about. The mission. The men by your side. Survival. I didn't think about the kid on the hill. I couldn't. I had written him off, a calculated loss in a war that was full of them. He was a ghost now. My focus had to be on the living, on the concrete beast waiting for us in the darkness, and on the rhythmic, terrifying sound of Hitler's buzzsaw that I could already hear waiting for us in my mind. The darkness before dawn is a cold, false promise. It holds the illusion of safety, the whisper that you can move unseen through a world that wants you dead. At a 400, that illusion was all we had. We moved down into the creek bed the lieutenant had so confidently pointed to on his map. In reality, it was a narrow, sucking artery of mud and half-frozen water that stank of rot. Every step was a battle against the terrain, the mud grabbing at our boots with a greedy, sucking sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. We moved in a crouch, the icy water seeping through our trousers, our weapons held high. I was in the lead, my Thompson feeling heavy and useless. Behind me, Chi was a shadow, followed by Miller. We were a three-man ghost story, haunting the German woods. For a time, the plan seemed to be working. The creek bed offered good cover, winding its way through the shattered forest like a scar. The pre-dawn fog was thick, clinging to the ground and muffling the world in a blanket of gray. It was perfect for an infiltration. Too perfect. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I'd been in this war long enough to know that when things felt easy, you were already dead. You just hadn't heard the shot yet. I glanced back. Chi gave me a tight, feral grin. Miller's face was impassive, but his eyes were constantly scanning the top of the ravine, never resting. They felt it too. The sense of being watched, of walking willingly into the jaws of something waiting patiently in the dark. We reached the final bend in the creek, our designated assault point. Ahead, through the mist, I could just make out the objective. The pillbox, the bitch, was a low, ugly block of concrete, a monstrous gray tooth jutting from the earth. Its firing slit was a black, unblinking eye, staring out into the gloom. It was quiet. No lights, no movement. The wire back to Webster's position on the ridge had gone dead 20 minutes after he'd left. I hadn't been surprised. A squirrel could have chewed through it, or a stray piece of shrapnel could have cut it. More than likely, a German patrol had found him. I'd made a note of the time, and then put him out of my mind completely. He was a non-factor, a ghost. My focus was here, on this concrete dragon and the two living men with me. I checked my watch. 0558. 2 minutes. I crawled up next to Miller and whispered, "Ready with the charges." He nodded, patting the canvas satchel beside him. "I just give the word, Sarge." The waiting was the worst part. The seconds stretched into eternities. Your mind plays tricks on you in the silence. You hear phantom footsteps, imaginary voices speaking German. You feel 1,000 pairs of eyes on the back of your neck. Somewhere, far away in a warm, dry headquarters in England, General Eisenhower was probably moving little flags across a map of Europe. We were one of those flags, a tiny speck of American intention about to be thrown against a wall of German concrete. The difference was, we could bleed. At precisely 600, the world erupted. Our mortars, right on schedule, began to rain down. The shells came in with a soft, descending whistle, followed by a series of crumping explosions that shook the ground. White phosphorus shells burst with a dull pop, spreading thick, oily clouds of smoke across the front of the pillbox. It was a beautiful sight. The lieutenant's plan for a moment seemed flawless. Then came a new sound, a deeper, more welcome noise. The rumble and clatter of tank treads. Through the smoke, I saw her. Darlin' Deb, a Sherman M4 tank assigned to support our assault. She lumbered forward, her 75mm cannon pointed straight at the pillbox. A steel big brother coming to back us up. A surge of adrenaline, of pure, predatory hope, shot through me. We could do this. We could actually do this. "All right, let's go," I roared over the noise. "Go! Go! Go!" We broke from the cover of the creek bed, plunging into the smoke. The world became a confusing swirl of gray and orange flashes. The ground trembled under the mortar impacts. We ran low and fast, our boots sinking into the soft earth. We were halfway there, 25 yards to the blind side of the pillbox. My lungs burned. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was working. We were going to make it. And then the trap sprung. It wasn't the bitch that opened up on us. The sound came from our right flank, from a position we hadn't seen, a position intelligence had completely missed. It was the sound of a nightmare, the sound of an MG-42 opening up at 300 yards. It didn't sound like a machine gun. It sounded like a giant tearing a sheet of canvas. A high-pitched, impossibly fast brrr-t that cut through the roar of the mortars. I saw the tracers, vicious green lines that sliced through the smoke and ripped into the men from the other squad who were attacking alongside us. I saw men stumble, pirouette, and fall without a sound. The ground around us erupted in a series of angry puffs as the 8mm rounds chewed through the mud. "Down!" I screamed, tackling Miller and pulling him into a shallow shell crater. Chi dove in a half-second after us. We were pinned, utterly and completely pinned. The perfectly planned flanking route had become a perfectly sighted kill zone. The MG-42 was positioned on a small rise, camouflaged so well it was nearly invisible. It had a clear field of fire on the entire approach. We were caught in a classic L-shaped ambush. We were fools. We had walked right into it. "Sarge, where the hell did that come from?" Chi yelled. His face pressed so deep into the mud, his helmet was scraping the dirt. "Intel screwed us," I yelled back, my words tasting of dirt and fury. They had a secondary position. They knew we were coming this way. My eyes darted to the Sherman. Darlin' Deb had stopped, her turret beginning to traverse towards the new threat. The tank was our only hope. Her cannon could obliterate that machine gun nest in a single shot. I felt a flicker of that hope return. She was slow, but she was powerful. "Come on, Deb, come on," I muttered, a prayer to a god made of steel. The Sherman's turret was almost pointed at the nest when I saw the movement. A single German soldier, no more than a boy, scrambled out of a trench not 20 yards from the tank. He had a Panzerfaust, the simple, deadly anti-tank weapon, balanced on his shoulder. It was a metal tube of pure malice. "Tank! Panzerfaust!" I screamed. But my voice was lost in the cacophony. There was a hollow whoosh, and a streak of fire shot across the churned-up ground. The shaped charge hit the Sherman's side armor with a sound like a giant blacksmith's hammer hitting an anvil. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a bright orange flame licked out of a penetration hole no bigger than my fist. A plume of black smoke erupted from the turret hatch, followed by a terrifying secondary explosion as the ammunition inside cooked off. The turret blew clean off the chassis, spinning 100 feet into the air before crashing back to Earth. Darlin Deb, our steel savior, was now a burning, blackened coffin. The hope died in my chest, replaced by the cold, sick certainty of death. We were alone. The world devolved into pure chaos. The MG-42 kept firing, its stream of tracers answered by the panicked, sporadic shots of the few GIs who weren't already dead or dying. Our mortar smoke was thinning, dissipating, exposing us all in the bleak morning light. I tried the hand radio, screaming into the receiver. King 6, this is Riley 2. Our support is knocked out. We are pinned down in a kill zone, I repeat. A kill zone. We need immediate... A German mortar round landed 10 feet from our crater. The world vanished in a flash of light and a deafening roar. I felt myself lifted and slammed back into the earth. Shrapnel whizzed over my head, and a wave of hot concussive force washed over us. When my vision cleared, the radio was a mangled wreck of shattered plastic and broken wires. We were cut off. No artillery support, no communication, no way out. Miller, you hit! I yelled, my ears ringing. He shook his head, his face pale, a small trickle of blood running from his nose. I'm good, Sarge. Chi was cursing, a steady, venomous stream of profanity directed at the Germans, the lieutenant, the army, and God himself. It was his way of coping, of holding the terror at bay. But I saw his eyes. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw real naked fear in the eyes of Tony Gallo. The Germans, sensing victory, pressed their advantage. I saw the telltale arc of a steel hand granite, a potato masher, sailing through the air towards us. Grenade! We flattened ourselves at the bottom of the crater. It exploded just outside, showering us with dirt and fragments. One stung my cheek like an angry wasp. They had us bracketed. They were just walking their mortars in, using the machine gun to keep our heads down, while they finished us off with high explosives and grenades. I peered cautiously over the lip of the crater. It was a slaughterhouse. Bodies were strewn across the mud. A wounded man was screaming for a medic, a piercing animal sound that was cut short by a burst from the MG-42. They weren't taking prisoners. We gotta move, Chi shouted, his voice tight with desperation. We stay here. We're dead. Move where? I shot back, the harsh reality of our situation making my voice crack. Back the way we came is a death trap. Forward is a pillbox. There's nowhere to go. I tried to organize a breakout. Okay, on my mark, we lay down suppressing fire on that nest and we run for the creek. Miller, give me a grenade. Chi, get ready to move? It was a pathetic, suicidal plan, and we all knew it. But it was better than dying in a hole. I gave the signal. We popped up, spraying frantic, inaccurate fire in the direction of the machine gun. For a split second, we had a chance. Then, the MG-42 answered, and it felt like the whole world was coming apart. The sheer volume of fire was incomprehensible. It shredded the very air, splintering the log I was using for cover, kicking up a storm of mud and lead. We were forced back down, our pathetic attempt at defiance lasting less than 5 seconds. It was over. I knew it. All the training, all the battles, from the beaches of Normandy to this godforsaken forest, it all ended here, in a muddy hole in Germany. I looked at the faces of my men. My men. I had led them here. I had followed a stupid textbook plan from a green lieutenant who wouldn't have to watch them die. I had traded one life, Webster's, in a cold, calculated move to save these two. And now, I was going to lose them all anyway. The bitter irony tasted like bile in my throat. I lay there, listening to the relentless chatter of the machine gun and the whistle of incoming mortars. I thought about my wife's letters, about the farm in Ohio Miller was always talking about the girl in Chicago Chai swore he was going to marry. All of it turning to smoke and mud in a place nobody back home had ever heard of. I cursed myself. I cursed the war. I cursed the whole damn world. We were trapped. There was no help coming, and the Germans were closing in for the kill. Time ceases to have meaning when you're waiting to die. There are no minutes, no seconds, only the space between one breath and the next. We were trapped in that muddy crater. The world shrunk to a few square feet of earth. The relentless, hammering rhythm of the MG-42 was the only clock we had, each burst ticking away another piece of our lives. The German mortars were finding their range, the explosions creeping closer with methodical precision. I could smell the cordite, the damp earth, and the coppery scent of my own blood from the shrapnel cut on my cheek. I looked at Chi and Miller. Their faces were grim masks of mud and exhaustion. The fight had gone out of their eyes, replaced by a dull, fatalistic acceptance. We had done all we could. Now there was nothing left but the end. Through the haze of smoke and drizzling rain, I could see them forming up for the final push. A squad of German infantry, maybe 10 or 12 of them, moving through the trees in a staggered line. They were confident, the movements of predators closing in on cornered prey. An officer in the center, a man with the arrogant posture of someone who knew he had already won, raised a pair of binoculars to his eyes, surveying our position for the last time. This was it. I tightened my grip on my Thompson, ready to sell my life for a few more feet of German soil. It wasn't much of a price, but it was the only one I had left to pay. And then it happened, a single, sharp crack that was utterly alien to the sounds of the battle. It wasn't the ripping canvas of the MG-42 or the flatter bark of a Car 98K. It was the distinct, authoritative report of an M1 Garand. But the sound didn't come from our side. It came from the woods behind the German line, from the direction of the high ridge. My mind, sluggish with fatigue and adrenaline, struggled to process it. A ricochet? A stray round from some other battle miles away? The German officer with the binoculars crumpled. He didn't shout. He didn't even flinch. He just folded in on himself, his helmet tumbling forward into the mud, and lay still. The German soldiers around him stopped, confused. They looked at their fallen officer, then glanced nervously back at our crater. They thought one of us had made a miracle shot. I thought the same thing. Maybe Chi or Miller. But they were both hunkered down, their faces etched with the same bewildered shock as mine. It was a fluke. A 1 in a million lucky shot from a dying man. The Germans seemed to agree. A non-commissioned officer, a thick-necked Feldwebel with a face like a bulldog, started barking orders, waving his men forward. They resumed their advance, their hesitation replaced by anger. The MG-42 on the flank, which had paused for a moment, opened up again with renewed fury, stitching a line of destruction across the ground in front of us. Then, the second impossibility occurred. An object sailed through the air in a high arc, tumbling end over end. It came from the same direction as the shot, a dark shape against the gray sky. It wasn't a German potato masher. It was the familiar pineapple shape of a Mk2 fragmentation grenade. It landed with a soft thud almost directly inside the camouflaged machine gun nest. There was a muffled thump, a series of sharp, panicked screams, and then silence. The MG-42 stopped firing. The sudden absence of its terrifying noise was more shocking than the explosion itself. The world felt unnaturally quiet, the silence broken only by the distant pop of rifle fire and the groans of the wounded. This was no fluke. This was not luck. Someone else was in this fight. The effect on the German assault line was immediate and profound. They stopped dead in their tracks. The Feldwebel was screaming, turning and pointing back into the woods whence the grenade had come. The soldiers looked at each other, their battlefield discipline evaporating into confusion and fear. Their perfect, meticulously planned trap was being attacked from the inside. "Sarge, what the hell?" Chi whispered, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. He was peering over the edge of the crater, his hard-bitten cynicism momentarily forgotten. "I don't know," I breathed, my mind racing. "Keep your head down." I watched, mesmerized, as the German squad, which had been seconds away from overrunning us, completely lost its cohesion. They were no longer an assault force. They were just a mob of scared men. They started firing wildly into the trees behind them, their muzzle flashes stabbing into the gloom. They were shooting at shadows, at a ghost. Their officers were screaming at them, trying to restore order, but the panic was spreading. Then a bigger blow. Tucked behind the German line was a small Opel Blitz truck. likely carrying reserve ammunition and supplies for the pillbox. There was another sharp crack of a Garand, and a moment later, the canvas cover on the truck's bed erupted in flames. A soldier near it shouted and tried to beat out the fire, but it was too late. The flames found the ammunition. The truck disappeared in a blinding flash, and a concussive roar that was far louder than any mortar. A column of thick, black smoke billowed into the sky. Debris, hot and sharp, rained down across the German position. The chaos was total. The carefully constructed German kill zone had turned on itself. Their mortars, which had been pounding our position, went silent. Their spotters were either dead or too busy trying to figure out where the new enemy was. This was our chance. The pragmatic, survival-driven part of my brain took over. Hope was a weapon, and I intended to use it. "Now," I snarled, my voice raw. "Move! To the tank! Go!" I scrambled out of the crater, my body screaming in protest. Chi and Miller were right behind me. We ran low and fast across the 10 yards of open ground to the smoldering wreck of the Sherman. Bullets were still flying, but they were unaimed, panicked shots from Germans who weren't even looking at us anymore. We dove behind the thick steel hull of the dead tank, its heat warming my face. It was better cover, a solid wall between us and the main pillbox. I took a precious second to assess. Miller had a new gash on his forehead, but he was moving, he was fighting. Chi was reloading his Thompson, his hands moving with practiced speed, the fear in his eyes replaced by a familiar, predatory gleam. We were alive. We were still in the fight. "What is it, Sarge?" Miller asked, his voice shaking slightly as he pressed a field dressing to his head. "Who is that? Is it a relief column?" No relief column would be a single man, I thought, but I kept it to myself. "I don't know," I said, my voice steady. "Could be remnants from Charlie Company hiding out in these woods. Could be a recon unit. I don't give a damn who it is. He's buying us time." And he was. We could hear him now, working. There was no panicked spraying of bullets, no wild, unaimed fire. It was the sound of methodical, patient, and deadly work. A single crack. A pause. Then, from a different position, another crack. Each shot was followed by a scream or the satisfying thud of a body hitting the forest floor. He was moving, firing, then moving again. He was using the terrain, using the confusion he had created. He was fighting like a seasoned hunter, not a soldier. He was picking them apart, one by one. An NCO trying to rally his men fell. A radio operator scrambling for cover went down. The Ghost was targeting their leadership, their communication, their heavy weapons. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt since we'd entered this damned forest. Hope. It was a fragile, dangerous thing. But it was real. We were no longer cornered rats waiting to be exterminated. We were back in the fight, and we had an angel on our shoulder. A very violent, very effective angel. The Germans were completely broken. Their assault had dissolved into a panicked retreat. The survivors were scrambling back towards the relative safety of their trench system, dragging their wounded with them. They were still firing, but it was covering fire now, a desperate attempt to escape the unseen enemy in the woods. The Ghost in the woods let them run. The single deliberate shots stopped. The silence that fell was heavy, punctuated only by the crackle of the burning truck and the groans of the wounded Germans left behind. We were behind the Sherman, breathing heavily, our minds trying to catch up with the impossible reality of what had just happened. We had been dead. 5 minutes ago, we had been dead men, saying our last prayers and cursing our fate. Now, the enemy was in disarray. We had a chance. Not just to survive, but to win. "All right," I said, my voice low and urgent, feeling the tide of battle shifting. "The job's not done. They're rattled, but they're not gone. That pillbox is still active." I looked at Chi, then at Miller. I saw the same thought reflected in their eyes. We couldn't let this chance, this miracle, go to waste. Whoever the Ghost was, he had given us an opening. It was our duty to drive through it. "Get ready," I ordered, chambering a round in my Thompson. "We're not waiting for them to regroup. We're going to use the help our friend gave us. On my signal, we're taking that pillbox." The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But now it was mixed with something else. A wild, desperate, savage hope. We didn't know who our savior was or why he was here. All we knew was that a ghost haunted the Hürtgen Forest. And for now, he was on our side. The ghost had fallen silent, but the opportunity he had bought us was bleeding away with every second that passed. The German survivors were scrambling back, their panic giving way to the ingrained discipline of soldiers who knew how to defend a fixed position. The main prize, the concrete pillbox we called the bitch, was still alive. Its forward-facing MG-42 was silent, but I knew there would be men inside, armed with rifles and grenades, waiting for us at the rear entrance. The miracle had given us a chance, nothing more. It was up to us to finish it. "All right, listen up," I rasped, my voice hoarse. We were huddled behind the still-burning hulk of the Sherman, the heat blistering the paint and cooking the air. "Miller, you're still on demo. That back door's our only way in. Chi, you're on suppressive fire. You pour everything you've got from your Thompson into that rear firing slit the second we move. Don't let them get their heads up. I'll cover your flank. We do this fast, we do this hard, and we do not stop until we are inside. Go!" There was no time for a second thought. We broke cover, moving in a coordinated rush. Chi went right, dropping to one knee and unleashing a long, chattering burst from his Thompson. The 230-grain slugs hammered against the concrete around the rear entrance, sending chips of stone flying. Miller and I went left, sprinting across the last 10 yards of muddy, corpse-strewn ground. The world was a blur of motion and noise. I could hear the sharp cracks of Kar 98K rifles from inside the pillbox, the slugs whining past my head. We slammed against the cold, damp concrete of the pillbox wall, our backs pressed against it, hearts pounding. We were in the blind spot of the main gun slit, but the rear entrance was right around the corner, a dark, recessed rectangle of death. We could hear them inside, shouting in German, the sounds muffled by the thick walls. "I can't get to the door, Sarge!" Miller yelled over the din. "They've got the angle covered." He was right. A German soldier was leaning out of the doorway, firing his rifle blindly around the corner. We were pinned against the wall, too close to be effective, too far to place the charge. Grenades started to come out, arcing over the top of the bunker, to explode in the mud around us. We were trapped. Our desperate final push had stalled just inches from the goal. The Ghost's miracle had run out. We were going to die here, at the very doorstep of our objective. The German in the doorway leaned out farther, preparing to take a more deliberate aim at Miller. I raised my Thompson, but I knew I'd be too late, and then a figure rose from the earth. He seemed to materialize from a deep ditch just beyond the pillbox, a place I would have sworn was empty. He was a creature of mud and fury, his face a mask of grime, his uniform ripped and stained. He moved with a speed and economy of motion that was terrifying to behold. He raised his M1 Garand and fired once. The German in the doorway jerked back and vanished. Before the others inside could react, the figure was at the door. He didn't charge in. He tossed a grenade through the opening, immediately dropping to the ground as it exploded with a deafening, contained roar from within. He rose again, his rifle at his shoulder, and stepped through the smoking doorway. There were more shots from inside, 2 sharp cracks from his Garand, followed by a final desperate burst from a German submachine gun, then silence. A moment later, the figure stumbled back out of the doorway, leaning heavily against the concrete wall, his rifle held loosely in his hand. He was breathing in ragged, deep gulps. It was Webster. Chi and I stared, our minds refusing to process what our eyes were seeing. It was the kid, the useless, terrified rookie from the replacement depot. But it wasn't. The boy who had frozen under artillery fire was gone. This was someone else, someone harder, someone who had just single-handedly cleared the entrance to a fortified bunker. "Miller, now!" I roared, shaking myself from my stupor. Miller, his face a mask of disbelief, scrambled forward and slapped the satchel charge against the thick steel door. He jammed the pencil fuse, smacked it hard to activate it, and we all scrambled for cover. The 30 seconds before it blew was the longest 30 seconds of my life. The explosion was immense, a deep, gut-punching boom that shattered the door and sent a shockwave through the ground. Before the dust even settled, we were moving in, screaming, our weapons spitting fire into the dark, smoke-filled interior. The fight inside was short, brutal, and intimate. It was a hell of muzzle flashes, screams, and the smell of gunpowder and blood. When it was over, we stumbled back out into the gray light, deafened, shaking, but alive. The bitch was dead. We stood there, the 3 of us, gulping the cold, clean air, and then we saw him. Webster was still leaning against the wall where we had left him, cleaning his bayonet with a slow, deliberate motion. He looked up as we approached. His face was streaked with soot and mud, and there was a deep cut on his cheek. but his eyes were what held me. The fear was gone. In its place was a look of profound, soul-deep exhaustion, but also a hard, steady calm. He had been through the fire and had not been consumed. He saw me looking at him and straightened up. A flicker of the old, nervous recruit returning for a second. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. He looked past me, at the carnage, at the burning truck, at the silenced MG-42 nest on the flank. "Observation post is secure, Sergeant," he said, his voice quiet and raspy. "I encountered some unexpected enemy activity. I took the initiative to neutralize the threat." Chi just stared, his mouth hanging open. You were the ghost?" Webster just looked at him, not comprehending the question. "I had a job to do, Corporal." My mind was working, piecing it together. It didn't make sense. The ridge was 200 yards away. How had he gotten here? How had he taken out the MG nest, the truck, the officer? I walked past him, my eyes scanning the ground, searching for an answer. And then I saw it. It started at the base of the ridge where I'd sent him. It wasn't a trench, not a proper one. It was more like a burrow, a narrow channel no wider than a man's shoulders, dug into the soft, loamy soil of the forest floor. It used every dip in the terrain, every fallen log, every shell crater as natural cover. It snaked its way through the woods, a thin, almost invisible scar on the landscape, ending in the very ditch from which Webster had emerged. The kid hadn't just sat on that hill and watched. He had worked. While we were waiting for the battle to start, he had been digging. He hadn't been digging a foxhole to hide in. He had been digging a tunnel to fight from. He had used his entrenching tool not as a soldier's last resort, but as a miner's primary instrument. He had read the lay of the land, understood the composition of the soil, and with the patient, unending labor of a man who'd grown up knowing the earth, he had dug his way right into the enemy's back pocket. Silently, methodically. He had turned the whole goddamn forest into his own personal mine shaft. All that knowledge I had dismissed as useless. Knowing how to move dirt without causing a collapse, knowing how to use roots and rock as natural shoring, knowing the sheer back-breaking toil of it, he had turned it into a weapon more effective than a tank. I had sent him to dig a hole to die in. Instead, he had dug a path to victory. I walked back and stood in front of him. He looked at me, his gaze steady. He wasn't the clumsy boy who had dropped his rifle at my feet. He wasn't the terrified recruit who had frozen under fire. He was a soldier. He was one of my men. I had 100 things I could have said. I could have thanked him. I could have apologized for how I'd treated him. I could have told him he had saved us all. But words were cheap things in a place like this. They turned to dust and blew away in the wind. We had a different language here, a language of actions, of shared risk, of silent understanding. So I said nothing. I just looked him in the eye, and I gave him a single sharp, deliberate nod. It was a small gesture. To an outsider, it would have meant nothing. But Webster understood. I saw it in his eyes. A flicker of relief, of acknowledgement. The nod was my surrender. It was my admission that I had been wrong, my vote of confidence, my welcome to the brotherhood. It was the highest honor I could give him. Later, after the medics had come and gone and the silence of the aftermath had settled in, what was left of us gathered by the burned-out Sherman. We were just 4 men now, an island in a sea of quiet destruction. Webster was sitting by himself, methodically cleaning his grand. I walked over to him. He looked up, cautious. Without a word, I unhooked the canteen from my belt. My personal canteen. The one with the whiskey I saved for special occasions, the one I never shared. I held it out to him. He hesitated for a second, then took it. He unscrewed the cap, took a short pull, and handed it back, his eyes never leaving mine. I took the canteen, screwed the cap back on, and sat down. The unspoken words hung in the air between us, thicker than the November fog. The war was far from over. There would be more battles, more mud, more death. But something had changed today. I had learned that you can never judge a man by the cleanliness of his uniform or the fear in his eyes. War doesn't make a man. It simply strips him down to his core and shows you what he was made of all along. I had thought Private Daniel Webster was made of glass. I was wrong. The kid from the West Virginia hills was made of something harder than the coal his father pulled from the earth. He was made of bedrock, and he was one of us.